And also, I want to say thank you to those other ones.
I call Gareth. Order. I call Gareth Hughes.
Mr Chair, Ngamihinui kia koutou kia ora. Obviously painstaking research from the member Tau Henare into that speech. Probably last week he's dedicated it, writing his speech, and you could really tell. And big writing. Mr Chair, I'd like to tautoko the sentiment from the member Tau Henare in regards to the Labour spokesperson Shane Jones, but I'd also like to mention the chairperson David Bennett and all the select committee members and all the submitters who came to the committee, who took the time to submit. I think we had a good process. Now, Mr Chair, it's a really important issue because every year we've got $800 million spent on road user charges, 580,000 vehicles are paying it. And Mr Chair, this legislation is in fact older than I am, dating from 1978. A few years older than I am, in fact. Now, Mr Chair, I want to, in this call, look at the Part 1, Clauses 3 to 6. Mr Chair, I want to look at the purpose, because when it comes to the purpose of the bill, what this is all about is facilitating the truck industry. What we're seeing is the government doing a whole host of other legislative, regulatory and financial support measures to the trucking industry. And again, this is another part of it. So I'd like to look at the purposes of this bill. One part in particular, we're looking at the purpose to modernise, to improve compliance, establish a framework with electronic management. Now, Mr Chair, I'd contend, in fact, all of these are in fact quite inaccurate. We're talking about modernising a bill when in fact what we're doing at a time when we could have greater electronic management of our trucks and our vehicles paying road user charges on our roads. In fact, we're not using these tools of electronic management. What we're doing is going down an averaging path. In fact, we're going down a dumber path, one might consider. When it comes a dumber future, Tau Henare might say, Mr Speaker, Mr Chair. When we're talking about compliance, Mr Chair, I want to ask the question, one of the reasons why we don't have compliance is maybe some of the questions in our transport fund are of doubtful quality. We're looking at a whole bunch of roads of national significance with dubious business cases. Even the current leader of the ACT Party, Don Brash, in his 2025 task force, was criticising some of these roads of national significance just on their economics. So if we're going to look at compliance, a key issue has got to be actual quality spending in the transport portfolio, Mr Chair. Because when you look at it, across the country, for every dollar this government is spending on all the walking and cycling, all the buses and trains, all the coastal shipping, they're borrowing and pouring $6 into more roads which unfortunately are only benefiting a small part of the country and unfortunately are of dubious economic quality. So what I'd rather do, Mr Chair, is invest in smart transport alternatives like things like the CBD rail link in Auckland, which would actually reduce congestion on Auckland's inner city streets, meaning there's more space on the roads for those plumbers, those tradesmen and those trucks using RUC. We'd like to invest money in safer roads, Mr Chair, and I'd like to note, and I'm quite proud to say this, that the Green Party has scored 10 out of 10, the only party in the Automobile Association's election ranking because of our prioritisation on safer roads. So, Mr Chair, our plan would reduce congestion and deliver better economic benefits. But, Mr Chair, looking at this bill, essentially what we've done is we've missed the opportunity with it. We've taken the opportunity to bring in a whole bunch of submitters to look at the road user charges issue. And it's important because the government itself estimates it's going to grow by 75% between 2006 and 2031. And the problem is if we're going to simply have all that freight carried on our roads, be it logging trucks in my hometown in Gisborne with massive road safety accidents, what we're going to see is more congested roads, less safe roads, greater emissions and an increasingly dependent freight sector on trucks. Now, everyone in this chamber knows that the road user charge scheme is one of the only ones of its type in the world. It's got considerably huge administration costs, $120 million a year. It was estimated by the Road Transport Forum was wasted in administration on this overly complex scheme, which this government, and the aim of modernising the bill, is simply going to continue. So whilst the Green Party does support a user pays approach to driving, in particular for commercial vehicles, we do think it's fair that they pay their fair share. But obviously that's not true, Mr Chair, because when you look at the Ministry of Transport's own research from 2006, I believe it was, they found that trucks are only paying 56% of their costs. In other words, they're being subsidised 44% by the taxpayer to undertake their commercial vehicles. So what we'd like to see is an actual user pays approach when it comes to road user charges. So, Mr Chair, when you look at the purposes and the changes in this bill, they're not overly controversial. They're not going to make a huge difference. Hopefully they will make evasion overall more difficult, and it is a very important issue, Mr Chair.
Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Chair. When you look at Part 1, Clause 3, it looks at the modifying and the simplifying of the road user charges. And I wonder, Mr Chair, if a fuel excise tax paid at the pump, like we have with petrol, would have been actually much more effective at modernising the system and doing what the purpose of the bill is, which is actually increasing compliance. Because what we have is something overly complex, very expensive to administer. So the major change we're seeing in this bill is the changing around the maximum weight. On one hand, we think it's a good idea. We think it's going to provide an incentive for vehicles to be used to capacity. It's good for overall efficiency and from an environmental perspective. But sadly, what we're seeing is this bill introducing simply only a framework for electronic payment. It doesn't actually go down the path where we could have actually taken some of these smart technologies which are on the market right now, which we could have been using for full electronic monitoring and payment for trucks. I think, Mr Chair, we could have looked at trucks above a certain weight level. Obviously for your utes it's probably not realistic. But we think it would have been desirable. It would have helped us plan the transport network more efficiently, would have helped the companies themselves with their data management, and it would have helped the government reduce administration costs because they could have more accurately charged for road user charges. So, Mr Chair, it's absolutely ironic that a bill in the name of modernising and simplifying the scheme, when we're wanting to access these smart technologies, is simply going down an averaging path of averaging weights. So we think it was a missed opportunity there. The major concern with the changes to the maximum weight was the impact on buses, and I'd like to acknowledge the Bus and Coach Association, who gave us a very compelling submission on the committee, and also the committee members who helped change the legislation in the Select Committee, because obviously it's a truism that you've got a bus carrying school kids and you've got maybe the All Blacks bus, absolutely total different weights, and a totally different kettle of fish to a truck, carrying rocks from the quarry or whatever. So I'd like to congratulate the Bus and Coach Association for their work and their submission. However, though, it has been left up to regulation. I think this is something we could have looked at the committee, and what we've essentially done is kick the ball up to the Minister's office. And it's a theme, of course, of this bill. Many big decisions have simply been kicked up to the Minister's office for him to decide, to him to make in regulations. Now, the most controversial element of this, and the part of this bill that could literally annoy hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders, Mr Chair, is that what we're seeing when you look at the big picture level is these small, mostly efficient, light diesel vehicles will end up paying more, yet it's the heavier trucks at the heavier end of the weight spectrum who will be paying less. So officials continually reassured me that this wasn't true because of the way the Minister was going to do it with the regulations and the weight bands. But I hope the Minister can commit to that, because he's going to have 200,000 or more angry light diesel vehicle owners chasing him around the country, I imagine. Now, the officials advised us the rises were only on the order of maybe $32 for a light diesel vehicle covering 15,000 kilometres, saying it's not much, but it is a lot when you look across the whole country. And the big fear, of course, for the government is they can be accused that this bill was simply about taking the costs from everyday Kiwis with their light, efficient diesel vehicles and, in fact, subsidising those trucks, given that MOT research, Mr Chair, I've already quoted. So I think it's critical this government doesn't disadvantage these small, efficient diesel vehicles. Another area where we missed an opportunity, Mr Chair, is this bill continues what we currently have, which is exempting electric cars from paying road user charges on our road. Now, it's great to be incentivising electric cars. I think they will be part of the solution in the medium to long term. However, it hasn't been wildly successful, Mr Chair. We've only got 40 electric cars in the country, despite all the hot air we're hearing from government members about how this is the answer and the main reason why we're investing or borrowing to invest $13 billion at a time of a deep global recession, a deep debt crisis in New Zealand, credit downgrades, borrowing $13 billion for new motorways, the new roads of significance to the National Party. So we lament the opportunities to actually encourage greater efficiency use. This is going to benefit our economy and also benefit householders who in New Zealand are paying around $6,000 a year on average for the Kiwi family on fuel charges. So it's disappointing that this bill seems entirely predicated on trying to help out these heavy vehicles, yet we're disadvantaging these smaller vehicles. So I hope the government in regulations looks at this, tackles it. But, Mr Chair, we will be voting for this bill in the committee stages because overall it's not controversial and we could be improved.
Darian Fenton.
Very much. It's a pleasure to take